I'm Frank Vaughn. It's September 24th, 2025, and there's just so much going on in the world right now, it's almost impossible to keep track of it all in your mind, but we're going to try and get through a lot of it today. The first thing is kind of a public safety announcement, at least if you're here in Saskatchewan, although this type of thing is happening all across the country right now. The headline from CBC is "Profound Sense of Sadness. Weyburn residents react to fatal highway shooting of local woman." Seemingly a random act of violence. Somebody camped out, if you look at the picture, in one of these fields, in one of these forests, along this highway, randomly shot two vehicles, killing one woman, 44, just a young woman, seemingly at random. Now, the RCMP has been quick. This headline from discoverweyburn.com, RCMP debunk rumors of additional Weyburn shootings. Now, why is the RCMP trying to get in front of this and basically dismiss this idea that this is a repeat shooting? It's because of this incident. You don't see Gravel doing that. Rurlo man says bullet hit truck near Highway 39. As the RCMP continues to investigate the fatal shooting of Tanya Myers, the poor woman who was killed by this, one man from Rurlo is questioning the circumstances that had left a bullet hole in his vehicle. I never found the bullet, but we did find the hole. If you've seen enough bullet holes, you know what they look like. Now, this occurred within a span of 100 kilometers of where this woman was shot to death, and it occurred before this incident. Now, if there is the beginnings of a serial sniper, they're not going to do it every day. If you look at psychopaths, if you look at serial killers, if you look at the kind of people, the psychological profile of people who do this sort of stuff, they generally space it out to reduce the risk of getting caught. If I was driving down to Weyburn right now, I would be very cautious. Maybe I would take the long way. Maybe I would approach from a different part of town. Maybe I would take the back roads. I don't want to panic anybody, but it's certainly something to be aware of, and I wouldn't tell the public to just dismiss the idea that we might have some kind of serial sniper right here in Saskatchewan. I think people should take precautions. Never letting a good tragedy go to waste, the left in Saskatchewan is jumping all over the government, saying that we have one of the highest incidents of homicide per 100,000 people in the entire country. But of course, they only tell you part of the story. On screen, in Saskatchewan, Indigenous peoples experience significantly higher homicide rates compared to non-Indigenous people. So Saskatchewan's Indigenous homicide rate in 2022 was 22.64 people per 100,000 killed. And if you take the Indigenous out of the equation, it reduces by a factor of 10 to 2.23 per 100,000 in the non-Indigenous population. The takeaway that people need to note here is that the homicide rate is largely inflated by a factor of almost 90% being accounted for from Indigenous people. This is Indigenous people largely killing Indigenous people. Yet in typical Canadian justice fashion, we have this headline: Calgary man who sexually assaulted a 12-year-old girl gets reduced sentence because he's Indigenous. The subquote is, but for his GLADU factors. Now, what's GLADU? The GLADU principle says that basically Indigenous people are not as culpable and responsible for their crimes as everybody else because of things that happened to people who lived before them. Not them themselves, but the people who came before. I would have imposed the sentence sought by the Crown, said the judge. So the Crown wanted to rightly throw the book at this guy, because we're not just talking, the sexual assault on its own is enough. On the surface, it's enough, but there was a lot of physical abuse and punching, and it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. There's no way on God's green earth that there is any racial, ethnic, religious excuse for this kind of action, but because Canada has the stupid GLADU principle, this guy got a reduced sentence and will very likely reoffend in the future, because that's what happens. Why is it in Canada that the lion's share of crime being committed in many places is from Indigenous communities, but we have laws that say we can't put Indigenous people in jail because they're not responsible for their crimes? 90% of the violent homicides in Saskatchewan are occurring by Indigenous people to Indigenous people, and yet we pretend that somehow not enforcing the law, not dealing with the problem, using kid gloves when we sentence these folks and then turn them back loose on the street is somehow going to lead to a better outcome. It hasn't worked. The whole idea has failed for a very long time, And you would think we would be keen to change our approach to actually make life better and safer for the lawful taxpayer who just wants to be a working tax slave in this country. But that's not what we do. We harass the people who obey the law. On screen, Gary Anandasandagiri, whatever that is. Today we announced our next phase of the assault style firearm compensation program. Assault style, not assault weapons, because a lot of these firearms are simply hunting rifles that you can fit a pistol grip on, and somehow that pistol grip magically transforms them into military-grade weapons. That's the message they want to send. But the issue that the single thing that I take the biggest issue with is which will remove thousands of assault-style guns off our streets. And as I said below, none of these guns are on the streets, you shameless monster, because that's what this guy is. He's a shameless monster. I'll show you why. None of these guns are on the streets. These guns are locked up, safe, in people's safes, at home, under lock and key, people who have no criminal records, people who have never committed a crime, because if they did, they wouldn't be able to own them in the first place. This whole thing is a lie, and a lot of it is concocted to simply satisfy the Quebec voter and something called poly-sous-souvent, which wouldn't even exist. No one even cares anymore about this organization because they've drifted so far from their original mandate. But if it wasn't for the federal government supporting them and propping them up and the media promoting them, this hysteria about guns that are literally locked up in people's safes, law-abiding people who've never committed a crime, this hysteria would not be able to continue. Now, why did I say this guy's a monster? The headline from CTV News is, Carney still has confidence in public safety minister after leaked gun buyback comments. Basically, he admitted in this leaked conversation, which many of you have already heard, and if you haven't, I'm not going to play it again because you can go and watch it. This is a news item that's a couple days old. My friend over at the CCFR, Rod Giltaka, they got the release. They got this private conversation which occurred between this man and a tenant of his who basically said, you're not going to get your money back, but I will compensate you personally for the difference between what the government's going to give you and what you actually purchased for the firearm. And it's interesting because just the way the CTV composes the article, first they lead with, well, Public Safety Minister Anandasandagiri pushes back against calls for him to resign or be fired following leaked audio in which he can be heard questioning the federal gun buyback program he oversees. Prime Minister Mark Carney said he has confidence in his minister. I have confidence in the minister. He is doing important work. Carney said when asked by reporters on Tuesday in New York City, adding the federal government is fulfilling an election promise with the gun buyback program. Now, I know the federal government has estimated there's only 150,000 firearms in this country that this buyback, what they call a buyback, it's actually a seizure, apply to. It's grossly understated. The fund is grossly underfunded. First off, they're not going to compensate you at fair market value for the firearms that they're seizing. And secondly, they're going to create a stampede to try and get that money, because once the money's gone, there is no buyback. They keep calling it a buyback program. CTV doesn't tell you that it's underfunded. So if you're not the first in line to get your money back, you're, again, not being compensated at fair market value, you're just going to have to turn in your firearm and you're not going to get anything back. This is a property seizure. Now, remember, I've told you on this channel many a times that you don't have private property in this country and you don't have real human rights or civil rights. And we'll talk about that a little more and its implications. But the fact is, here's another line from the article. The public safety minister says the conversation was recorded without his knowledge, as if that matters. That whole sentence doesn't matter because he said this. And we're also told, obviously, the comments are just in a private conversation and not to be taken at face value. Why wouldn't we take comments that this man made to somebody he's depending on for income, additional income to his big fat salary as a cabinet minister and an elected MP? Why wouldn't we take them at face value? It's a private conversation where you're more likely to be unguarded as opposed to in public. He criticized the entire program, but they're still going to implement it anyway. When you see somebody say one thing in private and one thing in public, first off, you know you can't trust them. And second of all, you know you're about to get fleeced. Now, perfectly healthy ostriches only produce meat and eggs and some other products, but the government's going to come along and kill them anyway to prove a point. The issue is, this is a long-standing issue in Canada, in particular when it relates to livestock and the CFIA's ability to just come in and kill all your animals. They can compensate you if they want, but if you don't cooperate willingly or you don't go along or you're not enthusiastic enough about the fact that they're going to slaughter your entire herd, they don't have to compensate you. They have the entire force of arms, the RCMP at their back, and all the resources of government to come and target your healthy animals. And if you're defiant, they will follow through and prove a point and destroy you. This isn't the first time. Now, CBC, of course, and this is where this headline comes from that's on screen right now for those who are listening, from hotels to gas stations, businesses believed to be contracted to support ostrich cull targeted by opponent. That's their concern. CBC, of course, always flying cover for the bureaucratic state. It's far more than just being an adjunct of the Liberal Party. It's far more than just being state media. What is the state? The state is the bureaucratic state. The state is the ministries. The state is that thing which exists no matter which parliamentarians you elect. And I'm very careful not to say which government you elect, because Parliament's not government. Parliament is the pre-selected contestants. So if you have a parliamentary election, the political parties filter out all the contestants that you can vote for, and those contestants all agree beforehand as to what exactly they're going to do and what government they're going to appoint. Because your MPs appoint the government, your MPs are not the government itself. This is the core problem in Canada. The other big core problem in Canada is that you have no private property rights. I mean, you have none. You don't even have the fake civil rights that the Charter gives you, and I call them fake because they are fake. If the government can come along and suspend all of your civil liberties and be found to have wrongly done so and never face a penalty or prosecution or criminal jail time for that, you don't have any real civil or human rights, and you don't in Canada. But even in that fake document that spells out your fake rights, you don't even have fake property rights. They can literally take your house, they can take your firearms, they can kill your ostriches, they can take your plastic straws away. All of these things are linked because you have no right to private property in this communistic country known as Canada, the socialist hellhole that everybody seems to think is this bastion of freedom, even as the evidence of your eyes would deny such an assertion. Again, CBC is more concerned with the fact that there are people actually protesting and trying to stop this travesty from happening. This is a long-running thing. Montana Jones, as I talked about in my live stream yesterday, was a sheep farmer, may still be, I don't actually know. A friend of mine went to a farmer's market with me. I was one of her supporters when she was trying to fight the sheep cull. If you go to Google, her name alone will not bring up this case. You have to type Montana Jones sheep, but I encourage you to do so because this is 10 years ago. Her sheep, rare Shropshire sheep, the AI overview is actually, it's on point for once. The CFIA suspected Jones's flock of rare Shropshire sheep of being infected with scrapie after a sheep she sold earlier to another farmer died of the disease. They don't know where the disease came from, but it died. So the CFIA came along, and despite initial live biopsies showing her sheep were disease-free, the CFIA issued a destruction order of her flock in 2012 based on the animal's genetic makeup. They weren't sick, and they were never sick. They weren't sick before they were killed, and they were proven not to be sick after they were killed, but the CFIA just had to kill them anyway because they had to prove a point. The bureaucratic state in this country is the ultimate arbiter of what is, not your parliamentarians, not even the government they appoint, the bureaucracy which survives no matter who is in office. The abduction. The night before the CFIA was set to carry out the slaughter, 31 sheep disappeared from Jones's farm. A note from the group calling themselves Farmers Peace Corps claimed responsibility, stating that they had taken the sheep into protective custody. The outcome, the missing sheep were eventually found, were all killed by the CFIA. Postmortem testing confirmed that none of them had the disease. The legal result was Jones and fellow activist Michael Schmidt faced criminal charges in connection with the abduction, but were cleared in 2016 due to unreasonable delays by the prosecution. Otherwise, they probably would have been convicted. The fact that the bureaucratic state can't even manage itself anymore, the fact that there's so many court delays, and this has only gotten worse, means that in this case, there was, I can't even call it a just outcome. They just didn't get to go to jail for protesting the killing of their healthy flock of animals. Nowadays, in 2026, this just leads to violent offenders being unleashed on your street, and you're constantly being told they just need more understanding. And this infection, this mind virus, this rot infects millions of people in this country, to the point where not even a couple weeks ago, I was privy to a conversation where it was related that there was an individual who said that a man who raped a 3-year-old to the point of destruction, to the point of physical destruction of this poor child, didn't need jail time, shouldn't be persecuted, but should be understood, should be given pamphlets, should be given care, and should be rehabilitated even though they had reoffended. You can't rehabilitate people who rape 12-year-olds and 3-year-olds, folks. But that's the kind of stupid nation we're living in right now. And even if they do get to court, even if they do get prosecuted, even if they do face their light sentencing, there's also a very real chance that it'll get thrown out because the delay in the prosecution of their case constitutes an infringement on their human rights. Isn't it crazy? Isn't it crazy? You have no property rights. You have no real human rights. And the biggest thing the bureaucratic state is concerned with, the biggest thing the politicians are concerned with, and millions of Canadians are with the rights of heinous criminals. Speaking of heinous criminals, massive pro-Palestine protests rock Italy. 60 officers injured. Italy was hit with massive pro-Palestinian protesters calling for the government to recognize Palestine, with Prime Minister Meloni condemning the violence. Why exactly would they do this? Because it works. Canada, along with Britain and Australia, have sent a message to the world that terrorism and violence on your streets produces results. Canada has officially recognized the Palestinian state. This is in spite of the fact that these protesters have been ruining our property. They have been chanting for not just death to Israel, but death to all the Jews. They have been chanting the slogan, "From the river to the sea," which is a genocidal chant. Now, I've said, and I stick to it, that what Israel is doing in Palestine is an ethnic cleansing. But I have no doubt whatsoever that if the Palestinian diaspora and most of the Arab world had the opportunity, they would do the exact same thing to Israel. Which is why I've always described the Middle East as a Gordian knot, likely heading towards some kind of final solution. We understand where that term comes from. And that's what I think both sides are going to apply to each other given the opportunity. And Israel has the upper hand right now. Did you know the Canadian military has ties to the Palestinian Authority? Operation Proteus. Operation Proteus is Canada's contribution to the Office of Security Coordinator for Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Canadian Armed Forces members serve with the Office of the Security Coordinator for Israel and the Palestinian Authority team as part of Canada's military task force in Jerusalem. What do? We help the Palestinian Authority security forces develop better systems for logistics. We actually coordinate with Palestine. The deep ties that Canada has to Palestine go back. We're spending tax dollars over there. We have troops stationed over there. Maybe it's not a surprise that we would recognize the Palestinian state, but I think it is shameful for this government at this time, considering the problems that Canada has within its own borders, both financially, criminally, with our system of justice, with our inability, the Americans threatening to, or I should say Trump threatening to make us the 51st state, or as I like to say, the 52nd state, because Israel would be the 51st state, in my opinion, threatening to take us over wholesale, and Canada being entirely powerless to do anything about it. We have no military whatsoever, but we have troops stationed overseas in all of these peacekeeping missions, which are clearly not working because nobody's keeping the peace anymore. We are fully engaged. I should say they are fully engaged in warfare. Peacekeeping hasn't worked. We should probably pull all these people back and focus on defending Canada if we can even still do that at this point. But that's not what we're doing. Instead, we're recognizing Palestine. Instead, we're virtue signaling. You know, Trump called Russia a paper tiger. We're going to get into that next. But I'll tell you, Canada is a paper puppet, largely for China and largely for these reactionary forces. In some of the worst places in the world, we are moving against our own best interests by isolating ourselves from the United States and trying to pretend that Asia and Europe can somehow replace the world's largest market, which is right beside us. Canada's in a bad way. We shouldn't even be wading into the political situation, the violent political situation that is the Middle East. We've got our own problems right here at home, and we don't have an empire to defend. We couldn't even, if there was actually a military operation, if there was a call to lock down or isolate even 3 or 4 Canadian metropolises, the Canadian military is completely unable to do it. Maybe that explains why there was such a huge, overwhelming paramilitary and police presence when it came to the Freedom Convoy, because they know if something like that got out of control and truly spilled out of control, the Canadian government has no power whatsoever to keep order, because they've denuded our military capacity. They've been so concerned with painting rainbow sidewalks on military bases that they can't even house our soldiers in facilities that are safe for them to live in. We got toxins, we got PCBs, we got mold growing. This has to end. But I don't think it's going to end, because this concept, this idea that I've been talking about, Fortress North America, the New Monroe Doctrine, the deconstruction of the American empire for the safety of the world, multipolarity, all of the things that Donald Trump talked about during the campaign have disappeared. Much like his call for justice and transparency when it comes to Epstein has disappeared from the radar, much of the promise of Donald Trump during the campaign has completely evaporated, and we are seeing a complete and total neocon takeover of the Trumpian revolution. Seated beside Zelensky, he had this to say.
Any questions?
Mr. President, do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do.
Awesome. Great. World War III. That's cool. You know what else Donald Trump had to say? Ukraine can win the war. And with sufficient funding from the EU and NATO, they should seek to do so. We went from stop the killing, millions dead, a tragedy, which was the honest truth and was actually one of the beacons of promise that was coming out of campaign Trump, to where we are now, where he's calling for the shooting down of Russian jets and the continuation of the war. Now, maybe he wants to transfer some of the responsibility for funding the war and arming the war and dealing with the war to the EU to save money for the Americans, but calling Russia a paper tiger and pretending that in this atmosphere, under these circumstances, that if there's a direct shooting war between Europe and Russia, that the Americans aren't going to somehow get involved and it doesn't spiral into a nuclear war. It's a tragic abandonment of one of Trump's key promises. This, as Russian troops advance on key Donbass town, Russia is continuing to advance into Ukrainian territory. The Ukrainian defenses are collapsing because they've killed all their people. They've killed all their sons and many of their daughters. In the pursuit of this fruitless war, Russia has more manpower. They have more productive capacity. We can have splashy headlines about where is it? Somewhere in here, it doesn't matter, that the Ukraine launched one of their largest drone attacks ever on Russian cities. We can have these splashy headlines, but the reality is, on the ground, day by day, Russian forces are taking more territory. And day by day, hundreds more, sometimes thousands more, are dying. It's useless. It's pointless. Campaign Trump was right. President Trump, not so much. The headline on the screen is, who's the paper tiger now? The EU will crack under the burden of Ukraine. Trump's claim that Russia is weak and Kiev can win is not just words, but it doesn't bode well for Kiev or the EU. The EU's broke. They don't produce their own energy. The problems that the Germans faced in the 1940s when they tried to prosecute a war to take over all of Europe still exist. The lack of oil production, the lack of energy production. There was a pretty good relationship between Russia and Europe in terms of trading capital for energy, and now they've completely shot themselves in the foot. And we're trying to do this liquid natural gas thing. You know, the West is doing all this highly technological maneuvering, but if we actually get into a shooting war, those are just great big bombs and easy targets for cruise missiles. And the energy supply chain of Europe can get crushed basically in a moment. All of this is going on. Well, other news media outside of the echo chamber of Western news is talking about the reordering of the world. West's grip slips with Saudi-Pakistan security deal. What's this all about? Pakistan extending its nuclear umbrella over Saudi Arabia. One of the guarantees that America offered Saudi Arabia, including the relationship between the petrodollar and cheap oil, was the extension of American military protection to Saudi Arabia, which was one of the key components of getting involved in the first Gulf War in the first place. But slowly and surely, BRICS is pushing the United States out. It's happening, folks. Power of Siberia 2, forging a new energy axis to bypass Western hegemony. The Russia-China pipeline deal is a geostrategic breakthrough for Eurasia, spelling the decline of Western influence and the rise of a multipolar world, and the slow collapse of the dollar's energy reign. This is what they are talking about. This is the future that they are building. And I had thought that there was hope that the Trump administration and the people around him saw this future coming. Resisting the multipolarity that we are coming into in terms of a global order and trying to maintain the American empire will just get us all killed, because it only leads to warfare. If we don't respect these powerful nations, their right to exist and their spheres of influence, if we try to maintain the containment, because that's what it is. It's no mistake that the United States and NATO have surrounded Russia and China with military installations and bases. They're completely surrounded. This is the reason why Trump wants Bagram back. It's about Russia and China. It was from a strategic perspective, if you're looking to maintain the empire, Bagram should never have been given up. And you see, that's a thing, too, that you have to do. You have to be able to see things from the perspective of everyone involved. So you have to see things from the neocon perspective. You have to see things from the imperial perspective. If you're truly about the empire, Bagram was a key component of it, which is why they want to get it back. But meanwhile, the world is moving on. One of the headlines out today is Joe Rogan's comments. We're just going to read the quote and then we're going to get into it. You're crazy for supporting this because it will be used on you. You don't think that the effing globalist lizard people who run the world are sitting here going, great, what do we got? 3 years. We'll wait this out. We'll wait this out. Yeah, let them say the government should be involved in censoring people's speech. Now, what he's talking about is the gathering and ingathering of energy. The memorial was a great big ingathering of energy and an attempt to move on from Charlie Kirk's shooting itself, which we should not do. And I'm pleased to see that many people in the space are not moving on. Some of the more popular people, they are moving on. They're just happy with their talking points. They're happy to go along to get along. They're pretending to be some kind of font of alternative information, but they're letting go of one of the most obvious political assassinations of our time with a fantastical story that a 30-06 round from the front actually killed this guy, when we know that the shot came from the right. 2 plus 2 does not equal 5. But Rogan is talking about this inevitable purge of the far left, this relegating Antifa as a terrorist organization, which I believe is only going to expand, because we've seen headlines this morning about another shooting. Where is it? There it is. Dallas ICE shooter named Joshua Jean, who murdered one migrant, then killed himself. Now, apparently, once again, we've got engraved bullets that anti-ICE. It just, could they be less creative with their messaging? Could they be, there's a trend here. First off, migrants died, not ICE officers, but this is just another example of the narrative that is gathering, that there is direct kinetic left-wing violence happening in the United States. Now, the left is crazy. The far left is crazy. They pose an existential threat to Western civilization, bar none. But now there's like this whirlwind gathering. There's this force being drawn in that's going to blow out across the United States and disrupt all of this ahead of the midterms. Now, where Joe Rogan is wrong, and this is the point that I wanted to come to, and as I do talk sometimes, I get away from the point that I'm trying to make, is he's acting like some of his takes are just so I was going to say stupid, but they're just so naive, or they're so incomplete, or they're so vapid. It wasn't the Trump administration that started the drive towards censorship. It was the Biden administration. It's been the left for over a decade now. with hate speech laws. Canada's introduced another draconian one. It's kind of scary. Maybe eventually it'll drive me off the air. I don't know. We're going to wait and see what happens. But it's the left that started cancel culture. It's the left that started targeting people for having opinions. It's the left in Great Britain that started arresting people for memes. It's the left that's done all of this stuff. And up to this point, the right has resisted the urge to take that power unto themselves in terms of not direct violent reprisal, but speech reprisal, actually censoring them. But I think what you're seeing now is the right in power has had enough, and they're now going to take onto themselves the powers that were developed by the left and target the left. And this is one of those things I've been warning for 10 years. All of this is eventually going to come back and bite the left all around the world. I think we're here. And I think incidents like this one just further fuel that narrative and that push towards a big, heavy crackdown on the left and the far left, not just in the United States, but maybe around the world. And one of my larger concerns in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination is that some of my favorite sources of news seem to be just abandoning critical thought and moving on and really clinging to this idea of trans and anti-fascist activism and violence, which is, it's not like it's without truth, because it is true. The issue is that Tyler Robinson had a transgender girl, boyfriend, whatever, furry, weird relationship, typing weird text messages and all these other things. And, you know, this is just another example of trans violence and blah, 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 blah. But none of it's true. I mean, maybe Tyler Robinson was those things, but he didn't fire the round that killed Charlie Kirk. There's no way. They did a 5-minute autopsy, because some people have said there was no autopsy. In addition to the fact the dozens of bots came out in yesterday's live stream and on my videos. I swear they're all bots. They've all got numbers and phonetic things going on at the end of their thing, all to claim that the round hit body armor. This body armor theory, which doesn't exist. I swear they're just keeping it alive to try and keep it in the background long enough that the entire story of who shot him and killed him fades away. Kash Patel came out and he said they're still investigating it. The whole thing isn't closed, but I swear they're just trying to make everybody disappear and forget. The memorial was, it's over. Now we're going to move on, channeling the energy into an action to dismantle the left by force, which I don't think Charlie Kirk would have ever supported. His legacy is being taken over and bent to a will I don't think he would have ever agreed with. The fact of the matter is, I showed yesterday very clearly the exit wound at the very least, and likely the entry wound as well. There's actually video out there that appears to capture the bullet. I'm not going to bother showing it today. Maybe I'll show it tomorrow. The shot came from the right and down. We also have the fact that the person who shot this famous footage, which you've probably all seen, of somebody on the rooftop, has been contacted by the alternative media, and they claim this person wasn't wearing blue jeans at all or a black t-shirt. They were wearing a mask, and they were dressed in tack gear. And this isn't where the killing shot came from. Nobody should be trying to move on from this shooting, because it's suspect as it gets. The ballistics don't make sense. They paved over the grounds. It smacks of cover-up, even though the investigation is still open. And we're moving on. And the ICE shooting, which killed migrants, not ICE enforcement, with the engraved bullets, yet again, just seeks to channel attention away from the Kirk assassination. And as I've covered on this channel, there were many reasons that Kirk could have got in trouble with many parties in the world, because he was going against the grain when it comes to Ukraine. Like, even Trump is flipping his script. In the wake of the Kirk assassination, all of a sudden Trump is pro-war in Ukraine, and people are going to spin it and say that's not what he said. It is. It is. There's a distinct change. On some things, campaign Trump is still alive and well, mainly domestic policy and surrounding illegal immigration and the war on drugs. But even that, they want regime change in Venezuela. You know, I could understand it Maybe even I could get behind it in a limited way. I don't even know if get behind it's not the right word. If the trade-off was the American empire actually extricated itself from all of these wars, stopped the killing overseas, and in exchange, they took over Venezuela, I guess there's a pragmatic argument for doing that. But instead, we're just going to get it all. We're going to keep the American empire. We're going to get an expansion of wars. Oh, man. And so this is crazy, too. Watch Democrats protest by chugging Tylenol. So the headlines, I mean, literally, I think it was CP24 or it was some other mainstream news outlet here in Canada actually published a headline of a woman with her autistic kid. And the opening of the headline was, "I'm literally shaking," that Donald Trump could dare imply that Tylenol may cause harm to the infant if it's taken while pregnant. The problem is, Canadian media is not telling you this. A lot of these hack news organizations aren't telling you this. This isn't Donald Trump saying this in isolation. There's a body of literature that comes out of places like Harvard that talks about the linkage between acetaminophen and harm to the infant in the womb. Also, the stuff on vaccines. Look, you might think it's anti-science. It's not. Maybe the merits outweigh the cost, but you should have informed consent. So the things that Trump is doing, largely via Kennedy's work, are valid and scientifically based, but nobody's telling you that. But because Trump said it, according to the framing, you've got these absolute idiots taking more than the recommended quantity on the bottle, taking Tylenol with pregnant baby bumps just to protest Trump. And so they're kind of setting up an experiment because they're putting all of this online. So there's a record of the fact that they did this in protest of Trump. Somebody should study this in 2, 3, 4, 5 years to see if there was an increased instance of the very things that the American administration is warning about in terms of consequence for the infant among the infants that are born by the people who engaged in this stupid brain-dead protest. All of this is because people don't like how Trump sounds. They don't like how he looks. They don't like his braggadocious, loud nature, and they're stuck on that superficiality, and they're protesting against something superficial in ways that have lasting and dire consequences, and it's crazy. And I meant to actually talk about this before at the beginning of the video, but I'm going to include this here. This is Vaughan, which is, I noticed that my name was trending this morning. And these are shootings that are occurring in Vaughan, I want to call it Vaughan Township, but really it's not a township anymore. Bathurst Street and Mackenzie Drive, Vaughan, received multiple calls about the sound of gunshots. A residence was shot by unknown suspects. Officers are in the area collecting and canvassing. The suspects fled. Expect a heavy police presence in the area. No injuries have been reported. This is the 5th time. Vaughan home targeted. In shootings, linked to owner of towing company who was fatally shot in 2024. Every single day in Canada, you can read headlines like this. Every single day, you can hear about violent crime being committed and the perpetrators being released back onto our streets. The gun confiscation, which is what it is, will not solve any of this. None of the firearms being used in these incidents, or very, extremely few, are sourced from legal, lawful firearms owners. How can you stand before the eyes of the public without being a narcissistic sociopath, maybe even a psychopath, and claim that you're trying to enhance public safety when bail reform is not your priority, when mass immigration without adequate screening is still the way things are done here in Canada, when criminals are being released back onto our streets and we're not doing anything about gun crime. All we're doing is dedicating resources to harassing people who have broken no laws. This country is in big trouble. I'm Frank Vaughan. I'll see you in the next one.